All right, welcome. We lucked out and I was able to track down one of the, I would say, rising stars in the Roam CSS community. This is Abhay, and Abhay is, he'll be the first to say he's not a coder, right? Which is what I think made this a great fit, because that was your biggest concern. You didn't want to come in and, say I'm this coding genius. And because of like where I'm at, and I think where everyone in this course is at, we just need to know how can we tweak and modify our CSS to design. And just to kind of take a step back, this video is to help you modify the look and feel of your Roam. So when you get it, it's that very default text, white, black, and that's about it. Ahbay has been able to either create or modify some themes to really stretch them and do some pretty cool stuff. So I know a lot of you want to know, like, how am I going to tweak it, or can I, right? So Ahbay is, and here's the thing, I can add next to zero value here. So Ahbay, this is on you. I'm going to pass it over to you. And again, I want to say thank you. Ahbay is just a cool guy that's in the Roam community. He's not like getting paid. He just doesn't even sell anything. I just asked him, he said, sure. So, I mean, well, what a stud. That means a lot. And I'm sure that when people join the Roam Slack, if you see him in there, go ahead and say hi and say thank you, because that's the only way we can really repay him. So, Ahbay, I'll pass it off to you and kind of just, or if you want to just tell a little bit of your story and how you got into this, and then we can go into that.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. As you said, like, this is really just a hobby. I think Roam is something that for some reason, so many of us have joined this cult, and we find it to be sort of like discovering Excel for the first time. You're trying to figure out how to use this, bring it into your workflow, and so on. So my day job is I'm really a management consultant, full-time, kind of working with clients and so on. But I really have this passion for the idea of the second brain. And, I think you've probably got a ton of stuff with your group around workflows and how to use Roam to really support, the core work. But something that, I found to actually be meaningful is how do you make the kind of layout, the look and the feel of Roam really match, what it is that you want. So that's kind of where CSS comes in. And I think if you think back to the past year where Roam is kind of unfolded, I think it was about like spring of this year when themes sort of exploded, right? And where there were a few individuals that were demonstrating how they were painting Roam, adjusting the look of certain tags, and adjusting the colors, the backgrounds, the fonts, etc. And then that started to really explode, and a bunch of people started to take that on and create different views. Roam didn't have a native dark theme. Someone came and produced a dark version of a Roam, and it kind of started there. But then since then, I think people have started to do really crazy stuff, like adjust the layouts and so on. But I think for the lay user, it can be quite overwhelming, especially if you don't know how to code, to imagine how it is that you're going to make your own adjustments without having to ask for help. So I thought maybe what I could do here is kind of walk you through my journey of not knowing what CSS even is, but to eventually being able to kind of create my own theme. And now I would say I feel confident enough that even if I don't know the answer, I know where to find it, and I have a community of people that can help me. That's awesome. So if it's good with you, maybe I'll just walk you through a few things, and then I'll kind of, maybe even just bring to life some themes and some examples of what you can do. So I think the first question is really, what is CSS, right? And so CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And I think it's enough for the layperson to understand that what CSS does as part of this equation of the World Wide Web is it separates the content from how it's presented, right? And so you've got Roam's code base that creates this page, right? And it's got all these HTML elements that are in here, right? So all of these things are coded. But CSS is what paints it. It's what tells you where to position it. It tells you what font to use and so on. So that's kind of one really useful thing that the folks who designed the web, I think, set it up so that you could set up that abstraction separate from the core content. It has a really simple syntax. So relative to a lot of other, coding paradigms and languages that can sometimes be non-intuitive to, just lay people, this actually uses words that are very familiar. It makes sense. And you can just Google the typical syntax for font family or color or background color, and you can very intuitively know how to use it, right? And what you use those attributes against is a selector. And so what is a selector? A selector is really just something that's telling the CSS what it is that you want to paint. So let's say there's this tag here. I want to know what's the selector for this tag in order for me to change its color, its background, and so on. So that's another thing you need to know. And then finally, there's a few things that CSS can get sneaky about. So it can actually add some text. It can, append text to the front or the back, but it can't do much more than that. So if you want to do something really crazy, like change how the Roam page behaves, or do a bunch of if-else logic, you really need to go down the JavaScript route. But you can stretch CSS a little bit to do some sneaky stuff, right?
So CSS,
so I think, yeah.
Can CSS do any actions? Can it do any action-based things?
Not quite. So if there are existing actions that the page is already invoking, you can target those actions. So for example, this is happening through CSS, right? When I hover over the filter icon and it changes color and it pops up, it so happens that the way Roam is coded, the state changes and there's a separate selector that I can target. So as long as the web page is creating, and if the web page is well designed, the folks who designed it have set it up so that it has different events that are being triggered. So it's a separate selector on hover. So it's able to detect that it's on hover, and then I can adjust the coloring when I'm hovering over it. So things like that it can do, but not much else, right? And again, I'm probably not the best representation of what CSS can really do. There's some people who can really stretch it, but it starts to hit up against the limits of what CSS is designed for. That's the way I would say it. And so really, I think what I would summarize that by saying is it's a way for you to move around and paint the objects in a website, right? That's really all it is, right? So right now I'm using pretty much vanilla Roam. I haven't really adjusted any of the CSS here, but let me just maybe also point to like why your students should care about this, right? So I'd say there's a few reasons. One is I truly believe that there's value to aesthetics, right? And so when you make your workspace, even if you're just working on your desk, you want to make your desk look good. You want to, arrange the things well. You want to use good lighting. You want to use colors that spark joy for you. So there's intrinsic value to just doing that. And I would never, undervalue that. But beyond that, one thing that CSS can really help you do is to hide things you don't want to see. So folks that are finding clutter in their Roam database, like maybe you're looking at your linked references and there's stuff there that you don't really want to see to begin with, you can actually use CSS to hide them. You can also rearrange the layout, as we discussed. You can reposition it. You can add padding and margins. You can change the width and height of stuff, which can be quite helpful for a visual look and feel. And as we discussed, it can also add some more useful functionality, right? But as I encourage you, don't waste time trying to stretch CSS too far, when maybe you should just get some help from some of the Roam hackers on Slack who'll give you a JavaScript extension that will do what you need to do, like inserting an object and so on. So for example, in native Roam, there isn't a button to open the right sidebar. You actually have to go here and hit open right sidebar or use the shortcut. So I had one of my friends help me out, and he helped me produce this icon. So you can see I have one here and one here, right? So that's an example of something that you can use JavaScript for, to help you out, right? So that's why you should care about CSS and make it happen, right? So now we can talk a little bit about, what are some of the CSS themes that are out there? I understand from your, course that you've encouraged folks to use Roam themes, which is like a simple extension that you can click on and activate different themes. But what those themes are actually doing is they have a long CSS code that's defining all these changes to the core theme, right? So you can actually click into that and pop the hood and see all the individual changes they're making. And the other thing I'll say is, in addition to having an extension or using stylus, Roam actually has done something really cool, which is that within native Roam itself, they've created the ability to add a CSS theme using code blocks in Roam, right? So what does that mean? That means that if you go to this, if you on your Roam database create a Roam/CSS page, then when you click that, you come into this new page called Roam CSS, and in that page, you can create a code block, right? Which is basically just when you go to a fresh block and you type /code, you can hit code block, click outside, and you'll get this kind of fresh code block. You'll see that it enables and unlocks different languages, but what we care about is CSS. And so what this is saying is that if I have this code block in this page, Roam is actually going to process that as instructions for it to paint itself, right? So it's kind of cool. Like it's basically saying, hey, I'm going to allow you to pop the hood on my CSS from within it. And so whatever you type in here in terms of CSS code gets applied to Roam, right? So that's really a useful kind of thing to have. And what can you do with that? Well, here's kind of the Roam theme that I made, right? So it's got a few different colors that I've added on, right? I've added some kind of radiuses to the theme. When I open up the sidebar, it's got a similar look and feel, right? I've adjusted kind of the top, and all of the callouts look different. And what I can also do is change the colors as I cycle through different options, right? So like here's a slightly different theme. Here's one that's just totally dark and black and white. Something that's more purple, right? So there's all these different varieties of colors that I can invoke, just kind of cycling through the block versions that I've put different code blocks underneath, right? So really straightforward approach to segmenting out the different themes, right? So that's kind of top level. If you go to the Roam Slack and someone shares their theme with you, you can actually just paste it into these blocks and add different versions and cycle through them, even without having to use the Roam themes extension, which is quite helpful, right?
That's very cool.
And yeah. And so then now that you know how to invoke CSS in different ways, the question is, how can you actually not only just accept somebody else's theme and import it in? So like, for example, here, I have my CSS file hosted on my GitHub. And so if you, Mike, were to ask me like, hey, Abhay, I really like your theme, can you just give it to me? I would just give you this one line. And I would say, hey, just put that into your Roam CSS code block. And then you're going to have this theme, right? That's but awesome. Maybe you want to, so maybe you want to add some adjustments to it though, right? And so that's kind of where I actually have an adjustments file that I've hosted on my GitHub, which has some things that I know that not everybody will want, but I want. And so I want to add those as optional things. So what are some of the things you can do, right? So let me show you some examples. So let's say, I'm on my Roam CSS page, and then I noticed that I've got all this information in my linked references, right? So these are all the places that I've mentioned the Roam CSS page in. And I really want to hide some of that information and just have a much more minimalistic view of the linked references. So what I might do is I might say, hey, I want to target all of this stuff and I want to hide it, okay? So what I would want to do there is first figure out what is the selector for this part of the page, okay? That's all I want to know. I just want to know what is Roam calling this part of the page. So now there's a really useful tool in all web browsers, which is called the Inspector Developer Console. So if you right click on any part of the page and you hit inspect, it pops up this sidebar, okay? And it can be quite overwhelming to see for the first time, but you don't have to worry too much about what it really is trying to do. You just want to be able to just inspect it and see kind of what it shows. So as you start hovering over, what it's actually popping up is it's popping up the raw HTML. That is the code that's telling the web page to look like this, right? I don't need to understand everything here though. All I want to be able to do is to just hover over different things and find the thing that I care about, right? So as you can see, as I move across the different pieces here, it's kind of popping up over here, the name of that selector. But I don't want to target something that narrow. I'm going to keep going up. I'm going to see, here it is, right? So I've got something called a reference item, right? And that seems to include enough of what I'm looking at that, being able to target that and hide it or change it would be what I need. So what I do is I just copy that piece here. So if you just double click, you can, copy that class. And if it's a class, all you have to do is put a dot before it so that Roam knows that you want it to target that class. And within curly brackets, you can include whatever changes you want to make to it, right? So right now what I've got here is something that CSS allows, which is to display none, right? So I'm telling it, hey, display none. I don't want you to display that. So when I activate that, you can see that it makes all of that stuff just disappear, right? And so all I'm seeing right now is a much more minimal version of the linked references where all I see is the page title. So that's an example of where I had a problem, and it's a purely visual problem. That CSS is perfect for any visual problem, right? If I want something to look different, I want to hide it, I want to change where it's placed, I can basically target it as the selector, and then I can make those adjustments. Now, let's say I don't want to display none, but I want to actually change the background color of those things, right? So what I can do there is I can just simply type what happens to be the way to do that, which is background dash color. And let's say I want it to look red and go crazy, right? So you can see that now that part of it is turned red, right? So I'm just basically painting, right? I'm just doing different things. I might also want it to look rounded. So there's this particular thing that you can do called border radius. And you say 5 pixels of a radius that I want to attach there. And you can see now that it's kind of got these rounded edges, right? So it's starting to change how it looks and feels. Wow. So this is an easy way for you to make adjustments. And actually in Roam, a little hack I'll tell you is that instead of trying to delete everything if you don't want it to work, just change the language so it can't read it anymore, and then it won't apply, right? So that's an easy way in your Roam CSS to just kind of turn it off and on. And as you can see, I'm indenting multiple code blocks amongst different kind of snippets that I want, rather than having one massive code block where everything is there. Like this makes it easy for me to turn them on and off as and when I want to, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter where the code sits as far as the indentation. It'll still be red. It can be the first one, or it could be 3 or 4 indents in.
That's spot on, right? That's a big advantage. And I would just encourage folks to have their main theme up top. So as you can see, in the layout that I have right now, I've got my main theme as the first one, some of the core customizations there. And then below that, I'm making all these other adjustments that I'm experimenting with, right?
Yeah, so that's really good. And you use the main bullet as sort of your naming convention.
Exactly. Yeah. So I create sort of, I know that this is kind of my main theme name, and below that I'll indent the main theme import. And then, if I'm doing something very specific that I'm testing with, that I want it to be separate from anything else, I'll just name it. I'll indent a block underneath it. And then all that is a code block, right? And then once you have the code block, you can change the programming language and so on. So that's exactly right. And you can keep doing that. You can also create in the main block multiple versions so that you can cycle through, which is quite helpful so that you don't have to, change everything. And then finally, the other thing I'll say is, one of the more common uses of CSS that I see a lot of people use, and that was one of the initial use cases, is to be able to target a particular page, a particular block based on the tag that's in it, right? So in Roam, one of the things that we do quite often is we use hashtags to really indicate what that block is about, right? And that hashtag is really a page of its own in which the linked references have all references to that tag. But the advantage that hashtags do, in addition to just kind of being able to kind of categorize things, is that from a CSS standpoint, when you inspect a block that has a hashtag in it, you'll notice that there's actually a component in the code that includes that hashtag as a parameter, right? So that means that if you know what a hashtag in the block is, you can target blocks based on what tag is in there, right? So now I know that I've got hashtag for you to smart block in this thing. There's actually let me see if I can find it here. Give me 1 second. So there should be a data dash tag piece, which I'll be able to find. Give me 1 second. Huh. For some reason, I think it's because I've got some, let's see, data dash tag. There we go. Yeah, so it's a few levels below. So I had to just kind of click down, as you can see. And you can see there that it says data dash tag for you to smart block. So that means that I can actually target a particular span based on the fact that it has this data tag. That's a really important thing to know. Now, for folks who don't know how to code, it can be a little bit intimidating to be able to kind of reference this data tag and target a different selector to make changes to it. So for example, if I have highlighted text in this block, I could change how highlighted text looks based on which hashtag is in that block, right? And so there's a guy that I'll link his kind of webpage to you guys, and he's done a really good job of leveraging this particular capability to make a whole bunch of adjustments for the look and feel of different blocks based on the tag. But in this case, all I want to do is actually change how that particular tag looks, right? So the way that I would target it is I would target this rm-page-ref-tag element based on whether the data-tag has 42 smart block in it. So you can see I've got that going here for me, right? So it's dot rm-page-ref-tag with, in brackets, that this data tag exists in it. And then what I can do is do whatever I want within that to adjust how that looks, right? So if I turn this on, you can see that what I've done is I've basically replaced that tag with an icon. So wherever I use #42 smart block, all I see is an icon. So it's super minimal, and I can also do a bunch of other things. So let's say instead of having an icon, I wanted to have a different background color, right? I can do that. So then you can see that that's how it looks. I can again do the same thing around adding a border radius. So it looks like a nice rounded icon. And there's a bunch of other advanced things that you can Google around CSS adjustments.
You can change
such as
color.
Yeah, exactly. So if I just go with color and I say, hey, I want the color to be white, right? I might have to put an important tag. Sometimes you have to override what already exists, which requires you to put like exclamation mark important next to whatever you've written. And you can see that that changed up, right? If I change that to black, it's going to change up again, right? So it's a super simple way. Once you've figured out the selector, and once you can just simply Google the natural language syntax to add all of this stuff in, it's very intuitive to make these changes live in Roam CSS and just see kind of what's happening. So you can play around, experiment, and do what you need to do, right? So that's some of the basics of what you can do. I would encourage folks to not try to start all the way from scratch if they're not interested in really learning CSS. I would encourage them to go to an existing person's theme. So let's say you look at my theme, and I'll just open that up here. So if you go to my GitHub and you go to my theme, the core theme has a bunch of annotations for what I'm trying to do with different code sections. And I've also kind of defined variables for a lot of this stuff so that if you're a layperson and all you want to do is change the colors, I have a section where you can just change what variable background's color is, and it'll automatically update and cascade through to the rest of wherever I use that variable, right? So that's an easy way for folks to just adjust an existing theme, right? But if you want to go in and make your own theme and understand what the selectors are, one way is obviously to do what I was doing painstakingly, which is like right-click, inspect, go and find the selectors. Or you could just go to an existing theme, and most of the themers have annotated stuff. So you can see that this section right here is all about the main body and colors. Roam names its selectors in pretty intuitive ways. So it says Roam body main, right? And if you scroll down, you'll see, hey, this is where I'm painting my block references to make them look different. So, and you'll be able to kind of see how another person has already solved that problem and extract that portion of the code, copy it into your Roam CSS code block, and make adjustments to it the way you want to, right? So that's an easy way for you to reference what people have already done. And honestly, if there's only one or two things you want to change, you should just go to the Roam Slack, go to CSS themes channel, and me and other people like me will like help folks come up with the right code snippet for them to paste in to do what they want to get done. It just gives you a lot of power. And I think that as folks kind of see different examples, they'll learn how to do it themselves. You kind of learn by doing.
Yeah, I was able to take, all that I've done is I've just been able to, like what you did with the hashtags, I just went through, and this is something that I think most people would enjoy, and that was just taking certain process-oriented hashtags and converting them to different background colors so they kind of stand out. So like me, I've got like inbox, workbox, idea box, so I like those to jump out at me when I'm scrolling around, because then I'm like, oh yeah, there's my one, there's this, as opposed to sort of blending in, because the default is kind of like a grayed out, right? That's like the default
Yeah,
hashtag
that's
look,
right.
which is good, but if you want to be able to see it, I guess
Yeah.
that kind of, one question I would ask, because well, two things. One, that import URL, is that
Mhm.
a Roam thing, or is that a JavaScript thing?
That's actually a very useful thing that CSS has, which is that if you have your code hosted somewhere else, like I do in GitHub, I can actually import that link instead of having all of this stuff. This is 1,600 lines of code, right? That
Yeah.
I would have to have in my Roam database that will show up when I'm searching for stuff in Roam and all of that, right? So it's an easy way for you to keep your Roam clean is to actually host it on GitHub. And you can look up how to host any kind of code file on GitHub. Like, I'm not even a coder, and actually there's super easy tutorials on how to do this. And all you have to do, for example, is have a text editor where you have, you save it as a .css file. You kind of drag and drop it into GitHub, and then you can host it, right? And so then this particular syntax, which is at import URL and then a single apostrophe, and then you put your CSS file in there, that will basically just in one line import all those 1,600 lines that I have.
Yeah.
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
And then in fact, what I have is, so that's my raw one, which has the 1,600 lines. I don't even actually use that. I use an even shorter version, which I'll show you here, which all it has is all of the adjustments that I'm making to that other file. So this file is the better dark age file. That's like my core file where I'm defining all the major changes and I have variables. This one is where I'm importing that file, as you can see.
Yeah.
I'm also importing some fonts. So another thing you can do is, instead of just relying on the default fonts, you can actually upload your own fonts or use some of Google's fonts. They have some really nice stuff that you can look up. And so I like a font called Work Sans that isn't, always in a system by default. For coding, I like, Fira Code, which again isn't always in someone's computer by default. So you can actually import those using the same import URL thing. And then I've got my adjustments, such as defining which color. So this is a hex code for a different color. And I'll explain more about that shortly. But you have to define colors using either an RGB format or a hex format. And those are very easy to find using Google. So if you knew what color you wanted to pick, you can just find the hex code for that color and define it to a particular one. So like if any of your members, I'll share the link to my code. If they want to create their own color theme using the way that I have it, they just need to change these colors. And those will cascade through into the CSS when they import it in, which is quite helpful. And you can see I've also defined the fonts that I want to use as well. They can change that as well. The other thing you'll notice over here is that I've got this two separate sections, right? One for light, one for dark. And so CSS has a way using something called the at media prefers color scheme, which based on your system's mode. So in your system, you can go to a dark mode or a light mode. It'll invoke a different theme, right? So if I go back to my theme, I'm currently in dark mode. If I switch over my system to light mode, you'll see it instantly changes over to a light set that I've got laid out.
Would you go to do that? I didn't.
Oh yeah. So right now, I'm going to actually my system that's not on the screen right now, but in Mac OS, you can turn off light and dark mode. So I'm just turning the system light and dark mode, and actually the browser knows that I'm in light mode or dark mode. And so this is a way of telling the browser that when I'm in light mode, I want you to use these colors, right? When I'm in dark mode, I want you to use these colors.
That's really cool. I wish more things were built that way, because you deal with that. That's a big, problem. You'll change something, but it doesn't change on your browser, and it looks weird. I was going to say one quick thing. Watching you with the importing of the URL within URLs is reminding me of the times I went to go change one little thing in PHP, and you have to go like 10 files deep because every file is referencing some other file, which is referencing some other file, and you're like, what should have taken 10 seconds is taking me an hour and a half, because it's like A references B and B references C and C references D, and you gotta get all the way to G before you get the one piece of code you're trying to fix.
That's so true. Yeah, I think you kind of can take nesting too far, right? But
Yeah.
I think over here it's like if you know that okay, this piece is where I'm doing all the magic. This is where I'm painting it, right? That's kind of how I have the logic. And then I'm going to keep some stuff always in my Roam CSS page that I know I'm going to want to turn off and on and adjust, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of one way to perhaps think about it. Um, yeah, so that's some of the really basic stuff. Maybe if I go back to you know, some of the tools that I was using there, I would recommend having a color picker extension so that you can find the hex code of a color that you want, so that you're not stuck only to red, white, black. You can actually find some really cool colors. So if you click on the extension after you download it, it actually allows you to go anywhere on the page and find the color. So like if you wanted to know the hex code of this, you just click there and you can see that it gives you a hex code and an RGB code. You can use either of those. And so you can then copy that into that particular location. So that's kind of one really useful tool. The other tool that I talked about was the inspector, which you can right click and do stuff. There's also for folks who want to do something more advanced, like there's some snippets that I can share with you, Mike, that you can share with your folks. That if you add those snippets to inspector, then it'll let you actually pause any stuff that's happening on Roam, so that it's freezing Roam and it doesn't change stuff up when you're trying to find the right selector. Because there's some objects that are transient. So for example, this thing, the moment you like click anywhere else, it's going to disappear, right? Yeah. So if I want to actually target this, I'd be hard pressed to find it because it's going to keep disappearing. And so there's a pause delay snippet that will allow you to freeze the frame.
That's really cool. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we talked about how to use Roam/CSS, which is great. And then I can also share with you guys a lot of tips and tricks. So Kato Miner is a guy that is quite popular in the CSS space. He's got a Medium blog where he writes up a lot of interesting ways in which he uses CSS. And he actually explains it in very, very approachable ways. So I highly recommend for any of your folks that want to like learn how to do this on their own, they go to his website and kind of look that up. As I said, the Roam CSS themes channel is great. I encourage people to try making their own theme, and I will just warn you that it can be a black hole the moment you start getting into it, because it's a lot of fun. It's like playing Lego. Make sure not to distract it from your core workflow, right? Do what you need. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, because Roam also is constantly changing. So the one caveat I will always say is that you might spend a bunch of time doing something, and then Roam has an update. If you check for updates in Roam, sometimes they have an update where they're making some changes, and then turns out that it breaks your code, right? Because the selectors have changed. So you may need to ask for help at that point. Or otherwise, if you don't want to mess with code, always good to use Roam themes, which is a much simpler solution.
If you use Roam themes, I just want to verify this with you.
Yeah.
You can't then go in and tweak it, right?
That's right. You can't, because the code is actually embedded in the extension. And so the way for you to, if you want to change something that's in the extension, you can override it in your Roam CSS page. So if you're using the base theme, it's basically equivalent to what I'm doing here, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like doing it for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically importing the code for me instead of me just doing it. So it isn't really doing much, right? We could kind of do this ourselves. But what you can still do is you can add more code blocks below that, right? In your Roam CSS page, or if you have Roam themes, just add them there, and then it can override it. And if it's not working, like I said, you may have to add this exclamation mark important tag to your CSS code, which tells it that, hey, that's the one I want you to use if you've got a duplicate one.
That's the priority. That's the priority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of your override priority.
Let me ask you one really basic. This is so basic, but let's just say that someone's got the full code. They can't do the import. Are there two things you have to paste in? Is that right? Are there two things you have to paste? Could you just show us how to start from scratch? How would you paste the full code in?
Oh, sorry, my AirPods just went off, so I think I lost you there for a second.
I was going to ask, let's just say someone has the full code. They find a theme that they like. But they can't import it, so they need to paste it in. Could you show us how to do that? Because I think there's two parts to it, right? There's two sections.
Yeah. So in mine, there's two sections, but not all themes have two sections. So for example, some of them actually have just one thing that you need to pull in, right? So let's say I'm I'm now in a blank in my vanilla Roam thing, and I've created my CSS code block, and I'm like, okay, let me find something to paste in here, right? So what I might have to do at that point is really just I'll just go to my GitHub where I've got this laid out. So this is the, well, let me just go back. So let's say this is the import URL that I shared with you, right?
Yeah.
So all you have to do is create that code block and paste this in, and it's going to apply, right?
Yeah.
So that's it's just one line of CSS that has all the CSS that I need. Now, to your point, if I want to do something different, which is I want to actually bring in the core theme, but not all these customizations, because I want to make my own customizations. And what I might do is I might actually copy this whole thing, right? Yeah. Which is what's in there, which is what I was importing, right? And if I paste that in, now you can see that what I have is a little bit of the under the hood view. So this is the raw code that has the 1600 lines that we don't really care about, right?
Yeah.
But here it's telling me what font. So I might change the font here. So let's say, for example, that instead of Commissioner or instead of Work Sans, I want to actually use a font called Nunedo. So I might type Nunedo in here, which is a Google font, and then change that, here and here for both light and dark mode. And then it's going to actually change, the font. So that's actually an easy way to do it. And then what the advantage of doing this, Mike, is also that they don't even have to know the hex codes. Like you can actually just click on this in Roam in the code block and change the color right there.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So you can say like, hey, page links, I don't like this color. So right now I'm in dark mode and I got this kind of purple color there. I want to change that to, yellow. I can just, I think that's another one. That's a page heading. So a page heading here, or is it a daily heading? It might be one of the other ones, but I have to click outside. There you go. Yeah. So you click outside after you change it, and there you can see, nice and easy. You can take some of these themes that we've been created and in a light touch way, make your own one. So that's actually what I did is I created this once for this Dracula Pro kind of color set that I really like. And then all I did was change those colors. And that's all that's changing is just the colors as I click through these.
Yeah.
That's a really simple way for you to change the look and feel of things.
So someone could take your code and completely make it look like a whole different code, but it's really the same structure, just different colors and fonts.
Exactly. And in fact, that actually gives me a moment to kind of pay tribute to my guru who actually set me up on this in the first place. Is this guy called Robbie who created the Dark Age theme. And it's a very popular theme. If actually you go to Roam's database, in their help database, and you go to their Roam called themes page, where they've listed some of the themes that are available, you'll see Robbie's Dark Age theme listed right up top as one of their favorites. And he had it set up in the way that I've got it set up as well. Like he had it set up so that he defined everything in terms of different variables so that it's much more easy to do. And so, it made it much more approachable for me. So the first thing I did is exactly what anyone else would do, is just change the colors, right? Yeah. And see how that looks. But then I decided to pop the hood and, like you did in PHP, I was like, let me look at what that is. And then I saw what he was actually doing under the hood, and I was then changing some of that as well.
Nice. So one of the questions I've got too is, once you've identified like a certain, I can't remember what you call it, selector or code script, you could just copy paste that again and again, right? To change multiple things. So let's say you wanted to change like hashtags, once you have it, you would just edit the text, right?
And exactly. So I think you can actually just copy the snippets from, a Cato miner and they usually provide you the snippets themselves. And then once you copy that in, you're exactly right. If I want to do that for 10 hashtags, I just copy it 10 times, and all I would change is the portion that has the tag name.
And then is there like a certain order of operations that it has to be in? Can you break it if you put it in the wrong, put something in the wrong way, wrong structure?
Depending on the underlying theme you're using. So if you're using someone else's theme, some of them may have used the exclamation mark important. Like I do that sometimes. I'm kind of guilty of it, kind of sloppily, right? Like sometimes people overuse that just to always override it. So what can happen then is that depending on the order in which you kind of place things, it can kind of override each other. I found that as long as you have the general order the right way, which is that the core theme and your adjustments below that, Roam tends to process those overrides later. And so that one will be the one that gets fixed. I haven't really had too much of an issue on order of operations though in CSS. I've had a bunch of stuff like around the scenes. The one thing I will say is I would caution folks against selecting too general of a selector. So every object, it's got basically a hierarchy of things, right, that define where it's at. So if you select and target the top level one, it's going to affect everything in it. So you want to try to go as specific as possible. So when you're, for example, in your example of a data tag, that's a perfect one where you're being very sharp and precise about what you're targeting. But sometimes if you just kind of put a star and just something really open, then you may end up sort of making changes to more things than you really desired. And you'll find that what you did in one place actually affected something else.
Yeah, I think an analogy for people that are not technical may be like a book. You can edit, you can highlight the whole book, you could highlight a chapter, you could highlight a paragraph, you could highlight a sentence, you could highlight a word, you could highlight a letter, right?
Exactly.
So it's like going down and down and down. If you highlight the book, well, that's everything. You've just changed the entire book. It's going to be a whole different look and feel now, right? But so you want to make sure that you're viewing it in that hierarchical way and making sure you don't overdo or underdo as well, because you don't want to go and every single time there's an A, you don't want to have to change that A. Like you want to, it's got to be that just right? But the way it's structured is through the tags. You have to kind of figure out which tag it is. The reason why I have a little bit of background in this is I've often used those data scrapers on sites, and same thing. You have to go and find the table and the name, and then and then you have to highlight the right section in order to, like, this is name, this is email, this is phone number, and then you run the script and it pulls it.
Yes.
I've done some similar where you're trying to get the right name, but then you get the whole table and you're like, well, that didn't do me any good. So you got to keep going. Well, and I guess I'll say this too, for people that are a little bit maybe skittish. If you break anything, you're just a Command or Control Z and it's fixed. So you really can't break it, and just erase what you put in there and you're good. I mean, that's it.
That's right. And in fact, even sometimes you can maybe do something that, you find hard to undo. There's actually, I can maybe send this to you offline. There's a code that you can put in the URL where you have your Roam research database that'll disable CSS. So then you can just load Roam without any CSS changes. So it's like a safe mode.
That's good to have. All right. Well, Abhay, this has been incredible. I think people are off to a great start. And I think, like everything, different people, some people may not care. They may say, I don't want to do anything. Some people are going to spend the next 6 months doing every little thing. And that's fine. I will say, especially if you're using Roam to create output as a copywriter, or marketer or those kind of things, don't get lost. Don't spend all your time over there. Set aside some time for it, but don't necessarily spend too much on it. Make sure that you're doing it in a way to increase your productivity. But also, I do think you're right. Aesthetically, you want to make sure you enjoy it. So you want to be in a place that you enjoy. Most of us are on a computer screen 8, 10, 12 hours every single day. So, do your best to make it beautiful and make it someplace you want to be. So, Abhay, I'll give you the final word if you want to say anything, or just,
No, well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun to talk about. I've never actually stepped back and kind of walked through the journey of doing this. So it was kind of cool to see how I've learned over the past few months how to do what I want to do. And I would just encourage folks to be bold and experiment. And then please join us in the Roam Cult Slack, where we are just a group of fun people that just help each other out. And so all the very best.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll make sure to get links to everything that you've said. So I'll put it under this. And all right, well, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the recording now.